she ignored the human's warning. Now she suffers the consequences. The sky over Zeltrax Prime was always dark, filled with strange stars and burning rings of color. It was a world where power ruled and weakness was punished. No human had ever survived long on this planet, but today, a girl named Mira stood in the middle of the imperial court, calm and silent. She was only 17, thin, barefoot, her skin pale against the rich black floors of the palace. Her hair was tied roughly behind her head, her clothes simple and torn. Around her stood the royal elite, tall alien beings with sharp features, glowing eyes, and twisted smiles. They laughed, not kindly. "She won't last a day," hissed one noblewoman, sipping a blue drink from a long glass. "A soft earth thing," added a general. "We should throw her into the pit with the Vornix tonight." But Myra didn't flinch. She kept her head low. Her hands were behind her back. Her lips didn't move, not even to whisper. She had arrived just hours earlier, captured by alien traders during a raid near the outer colonies. Earth had fallen quiet in recent years. Many believed the humans had lost their fight. Zeltrax rulers took what they wanted: tech, minerals, slaves. But Myra was different. No one could explain why she had not been marked or chained, why her presence felt ... off. Even the guards said she was strange, too quiet, too still. The Empress of Zeltrax watched her from a tall throne made of crystal bones. Her voice echoed across the court. "What is your name, human?" Mira looked up slowly. Her eyes were dark, deep, and calm like still water. She said nothing. A guard stepped forward and hit her across the face. "The Empress asked you a question." Still, she didn't answer. Blood ran from her lip. She wiped it away with her sleeve, then returned to silence. That night, the servants whispered in fear. "She's going to die tomorrow," said one. "No," said another. "The Empress will punish her tonight for her disrespect." But in her dark room, Mira sat cross-legged on the floor. The walls were cold metal. There was no bed, no food. Yet she didn't sleep. She placed one hand on the ground, and she whispered, softly, slowly, in a language no one in Zeltrax had ever heard. Somewhere far below the palace, something ancient stirred. The next day, Mira was brought before the nobles again. A special event had been arranged, a test of worth, a punishment. A game. She was placed inside a large pit made of stone. The nobles sat above, watching from balconies, laughing. From a cage on the other side of the arena, they released the Vornix. It was Zeltrax's favorite beast, large like a tiger, but with black scales, 6 yellow eyes, and long claws. It had killed over 40 slaves in the past year alone. The crowd cheered. Myra stood alone. No weapon, no shield, just a girl in rags, facing death. The Vornix growled. It circled. Myra didn't run. Her eyes followed the creature, but her feet did not move. She whispered again, soft words, broken syllables, barely audible. Suddenly, the Vornix stopped, its head tilted. The crowd fell quiet. It sniffed the air, then took one step forward and lowered its massive body to the ground. Its head touched the dirt before Mira's feet. Gasps. Double quotes. No. "That's impossible," the general shouted. "It must be drugged." Myra slowly placed a hand on the Vornix's head. It made a low sound, something close to a purr. The Empress stood, her voice sharp. "What are you?" Mira looked up. For the first time, she spoke. "I'm a reminder." Silence swept the court. No one understood her words. But something about the way she said them come, certain, and cold sent shivers through the alien's spines. From that moment, Myra was no longer just a servant. She was a question, a mystery, a threat. Why didn't she cry? Why didn't she beg to go home? And why did the deadliest predator on Zeltrax bow before her like a pet? The court had no answers, but they would soon learn. Myra didn't come to survive. She came to conquer. The story of the girl spread faster than fire through the halls of Zeltrax. Servants whispered. Soldiers stiffened. Even the nobles, proud and cruel, lowered their voices when saying her name. Mira, the girl who stood before the Vornix and didn't die. The girl, the beast bowed to. In the past, such tales would have been laughed at, but not this time. Too many had seen it with their own eyes. Still, the Emperor believed none of it. A legend, he said. A weak human trick, a lucky moment. Beasts obey strength, he growled, not whispers. So he made a plan. He summoned Mira to his private chamber deep inside the Shadow Spire, where the true power of Zeltrax lived. No audience, no guards, only the Emperor and her. The room was dark. Walls made of volcanic glass, glowing faint red, a long table stretched between them. Mira stood quietly. No fear in her eyes, no questions on her lips. The Emperor was old, tall, and covered in armor made from the bones of fallen warlords. His voice was low, like distant thunder. I hear. You can speak to animals. Mira said nothing. He leaned forward. Do you know what we do to liars on She still didn't answer. Fine, he said, standing. Let us play a game. He clapped once. A door opened behind Mira. From the shadows came not one but 3. Vornix larger, bloodier, untamed. Their eyes burned with hunger. One had dried. Blood still on its claws. This wasn't a test. It was an execution. The Emperor smiled. Let's see if your miracle works twice. The predators circled her. Mira stood completely still. Then she did something no one expected. She closed her eyes. The Vornix growled. She raised her hand, slowly, like she was feeling the air. Then she spoke, not in any known Earth language, not in Zeltrax's tongue, but in something deeper, something older. The language of instinct, of pain, of survival. The air shimmered. For a moment, everything went quiet even. The lights flickered, and then, the largest Vornix howled and dropped to its knees. The second beast followed, its head pressed to the cold floor. The third stared for a moment, and then gently crawled to her side and licked her hand. Mira opened her eyes. The Emperor stood frozen. No words, no breath, just silence. She walked past the beasts and stood directly before him. Not close enough to be a threat, but close enough to be seen. She spoke again, calmly, softly. You call it a game, but this is not your board, and I'm not one of your pieces. The Emperor clenched his fist, but he didn't move. Mira turned her back and walked away. The beasts followed her, like silent shadows. After she left, a single drop of sweat ran down the Emperor's cheek. That night, Zeltrax trembled, not from war, not from rebels, but from a girl who never raised a weapon, but made killers kneel. Some believed she was a cursed spirit. Others thought Earth had sent a weapon in human form. One thing was certain. She had survived again, and worse, she had won. But the court couldn't allow it. In the shadows, new plans formed. If brute force couldn't break her, perhaps trickery could. The Emperor called upon his son, Prince Kyle, cold-hearted, clever, and known for breaking the minds of spies. Find out what she is, he ordered, and if she lies, Kyle smiled. I'll make her wish the beasts had killed her. Far below, in her cell, Mira fed the Vornix with her hands. They purred like kittens. She looked up toward the ceiling, her voice barely a breath. They're coming, she whispered. Good, because Mira was done waiting. The game had just begun. Prince Kale was unlike his father, where the Emperor ruled with fire. Kale ruled with silence. He studied people not just their words, but their pauses, not their movements, but the reasons behind them. His eyes saw what others ignored. And now, those eyes were locked on one person, Mira. He watched her from the shadows, not once, not twice, But every day, she walked the palace halls like a ghost, never in a rush, never afraid. The guards stepped back without realizing. Servants bowed without knowing why. Even the royal hounds avoided her gaze. She had no power, no army, no armor. And yet, the entire palace adjusted to her presence. That was power. But Kale didn't fear her. He wanted answers, so he made a trap. He entered her chamber at night. No guards, no sound. Just him and a device in his pocket that could record sound and energy patterns. He didn't want her words. He wanted her secrets. Mira was sitting on the floor, her hands resting on a bowl of water. Her eyes were closed. Kale didn't move. He stood behind her, quiet as death. And then, she spoke not to him, but to something else. In a voice softer than wind, she said, "I remember the stars. I remember when we were one. You were not beasts back then. You were protectors." The water in the bowl shimmered. The light dimmed. Kale's device crackled, then shut off completely. Mira paused, her head tilted slightly. "I know you're there, Prince," she said. He stepped forward, calm, cold. "And I know you're not just a girl." She opened her eyes. "I never said I was." He crossed his arms. "Who are you?" Mira stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. "I am what happens when you ignore the old warnings. When you steal too much, kill too much, mock too much." Kale narrowed his eyes. "You speak like a priest, but I see no God." Mira walked past him, toward the door. She stopped beside him and whispered, "Then you're not looking closely." The next morning, Kale sent spies to check every record on Earth. Historical texts, forbidden books, war logs, myths. Nothing explained Mira, but one old scribe came forward. She was blind, ancient, and barely alive. Her voice was cracked like dry stone. She said only one word. "She's a whispered one." Kale frowned. "That's a bedtime story." The scribe smiled. "Not anymore." She handed him a scroll, torn and faded. It spoke of a lost human bloodline, those born not from war, but from harmony, children of voice and memory. They spoke to the wild. They commanded silence. They arrived when civilizations reached their peak. Just before their fall, the last whispered one had lived 2,000 years ago. And she destroyed an empire larger than Zeltrax. Kale burned the scroll, but it was too late. Fear spreads faster than facts. Soon, the palace was whispering again, not about Mira's weakness, but about her origin. Was she a myth reborn, a curse, or a signal? Even the emperor felt it. His dreams were no longer peaceful. He saw fires. He saw beasts bowing to a girl made of light. He woke with sweat and rage. "End this," he ordered, "before she becomes hope." Kale agreed, but not with blades. With truth. He entered Mira's room again the next night. This time, she was waiting. "You want to know who I am?" she asked. He nodded. "I need to." She walked to the wall and touched a tiny crack. The stone shifted. A hidden panel opened. Inside was a mirror, old, covered in dust. She turned it toward him. In the reflection, he didn't see himself. He saw Earth, burning, forgotten cities, lost forests, wolves howling, rivers turning red, and among it all Mira standing in the center, untouched by time. Kale gasped. "What is this?" she whispered. "Memory. The kind you've tried to erase." The mirror shattered. Kale staggered back, and Mira spoke the words that would haunt him forever. "You don't fear me, Prince. You fear what I remind you of, that even the strongest empires are built on borrowed time." And with that, she turned and walked away again. But this time, Kale didn't follow, because for the first time in his life, he was afraid. The nights on Zeltrax had begun to change. They were colder, quieter. Even the machines seemed slower, hesitant, as if the Empire itself had started to listen to something ancient and invisible. That something was Mira, but Mira wasn't listening anymore. She was remembering. It began with a scent of strange, metallic temps in the palace air. Then came the dreams, blinding flashes, screams underwater, a field of black flowers, a single voice calling, her name not from Earth, not from Zeltrax, but from before. Then came the pain. It started behind her eyes, a dull throb that turned into fire. Her fingers trembled, her chest tightened, but she didn't scream, not even when her vision blurred, and the ground tilted beneath her feet. She stumbled into the training yard at dawn, blood dripping from her nose. Guards stared. One stepped forward. Are you injured? Mira looked up. Her eyes were glowing, faintly gold. She said only one word. No. Then, she collapsed. They rushed her to the healing chamber, a place normally reserved for Zeltrax royalty. Machines buzzed. Scans began. Readings failed. Her heart rhythm wasn't human. Her brainwaves weren't readable. She wasn't dying. She was changing. Prince Kale watched through a glass wall. Arms crossed. This shouldn't be possible, said the chief healer. Her DNA isn't static, it's rewriting itself. Actively. Kale frowned. Into what? We don't know. Kale leaned closer to the glass, and then Myra opened her eyes. For a brief second, her reflection appeared behind the glass. But it wasn't her. It was someone else, an older version, covered in armor, surrounded by fire, eyes glowing like stars, and then it vanished. That night, Kale broke into the Empire's oldest ark, of the one sealed since the last planetary war. The air inside smelled of rust and secrets. He searched for hours, and finally, in a vault marked Eclipsed Files, Project Memerix, he found it. A video, corrupted, partially restored. In it, a woman stood alone on a ruined battlefield. The sky was black. Alien bodies littered the ground. She looked human, barely. Her voice was cold and calm. To remember is to awaken. To awaken is to end. I am not born, I am called. She turned to the camera and smiled. She looked exactly like Mira. Kale ran back to the palace. But Myra was already gone. The guards had been found unconscious. No signs of violence. No broken locks. No damage. Just one strange detail. Each guard had a memory. Erased, a single piece of their past was now missing. Some forgot their names. Others forgot entire years. And written on the wall, in black dust, were the words, I don't take lives. I take what fuels them. Outside the palace, Mira walked alone under the stars. But she was not alone in her mind. Visions surged through her thoughts, memories that weren't hers, yet felt familiar. She saw herself fighting in places that didn't exist anymore. She saw cities falling, not by weapons, but by forgetting. Whole civilizations lost, not destroyed, but erased from memory. It wasn't just blood that ran in her veins, it was echoes. She sat under a broken tower and whispered, I remember who I am now, and why they sent me back. Because Myra had not been taken from Earth. She had been returned to finish what was started long ago, to make the universe remember the price of mocking what they don't understand. She looked to the sky, toward a constellation shaped like a claw. Let the predators come, she said. I'll remind them who taught them to kneel. Back at the palace, the Emperor stood in silence. Kale handed him the corrupted video. After watching it, the Emperor asked, was this girl a god? Kale shook his head. No, father, she's worse. How so? Kale stared into the darkness. She remembers everything we tried to erase. In the oldest temple on Zeltrax, buried beneath the planet's surface and sealed for 5,000 years, the walls began to hum. No one had entered in centuries. No one could. It was locked with something no code or force could break memory. Until now. The stones stirred. The gates, silent since the last solar cycle, trembled open. Dust lifted into the air, like breath returning to lungs, and from deep inside the dark halls, something awakened, above chaos, had taken root. The nobles of had split. Some demanded Mira's execution before she brings down the stars, one cried. Others insisted she was the prophecy reborn, the whispered one who would restore balance. But the truth was worse than both. She was neither punishment nor savior. She was the memory they tried to bury, and she was no longer alone. Across the empire, strange events spread like a virus. Wild creatures long thought extinct appeared near cities. They did not attack. They simply gathered. Waiting. Children began to hum forgotten tunes in their sleep. Old machines powered on without fuel. Plants bloomed from dead soil. And in every corner of the empire, one word kept appearing scratched into walls, whispered in markets, etched into metal. She speaks for the silence. In a hidden chamber, Myra stood before a curved wall covered in ancient symbols. Her hands traced each mark as if reading music. Beside her, the Vornix beasts lay curled, calm and obedient. But she wasn't controlling them. She was remembering them. These creatures were never yours, she whispered. You bent them through fear. I bring back what they forgot who they truly are. From the wall, a light pulsed. One symbol glowed brighter than the rest. A spiral of stars. Her hand rested on it. The wall opened, revealing a tall, thin obelisk, pulsing with golden light. It was a memory, Korra, living archive. Created by an extinct race called the Sci. Mira placed her palm on it. A voice echoed through her bones. Not sound but knowing. You are the key, bearer of silence. We stored truth in your bloodline. They erased it. You have reawakened the memory of species. Mira closed her eyes as visions flowed through her mind. Planets conquered by cultures wiped clean not by bombs, but by rewriting history. Empires built by erasing voices. But one planet had resisted, Earth, not through war but through remembrance. Songs, myths, whispers passed from mother to child. Earth survived by remembering what others forgot. And Mira was born from that resistance. She opened her eyes. Now, she understood. She wasn't here to fight Xeltrax. She was here to undo it. Back in the palace, panic grew. An advisor screamed. The animals in the south have gathered by the hundreds. They sit in circles, unmoving. Another shouted, our old satellites are coming online by themselves. Kale remained silent, but his mind was racing. He remembered the old scroll. The blind scribe had shown him the one he burned. But some lines still echoed in his mind. When the beasts bow, and the walls breathe, the whispered one shall rise, not with an army, but with memory, and the force of forgetting shall fall. The emperor struck his throne with a fist. Bring her here, now. But his words were answered by silence. All across the palace, systems began shutting down. Lights blinked, walls cracked. The palace AI, known as ELYX, spoke a single message before going dark. Memory restored, silence initiated. That night, the skies above Xeltrax changed. A ring of stars, invisible for centuries, became visible once more. To most they meant nothing. To Mira, they were a signal. The silent force had returned. She stood at the edge of a cliff, wind in her hair, beasts beside her, the memory core glowing behind her below. Thousands of wild creatures, some alien, some ancient, stood facing her. They didn't roar, they didn't kneel, they waited. And Mira raised her hand. Not war, she said softly. Restoration. Because to bring down an empire built on lies, you don't need fire. You need to help the world remember. Asterisk, the great arena of Xeltrax was carved into the planet's crusts, so vast it could hold 250,000 beings, so deep. The sky itself seemed far away. It was built for war, built for humiliation, and today, it was prepared for a spectacle unlike any in history. At its center stood Myra, alone, no weapons, no armor, just her breath against the cold wind. The Empire had summoned its citizens, nobles, soldiers, civilians, scholars one drawn by the promise of watching the strange human girl face the might of Zeltrax's most legendary predator, the Triclawed Vornix Prime, not just one beast, but the first, the original, untamed, unbroken, kept frozen for 2,000 years, a creature bred in silence, trained in darkness, and unleashed only when a lesson had to be made eternal. The Emperor's voice boomed through the arena. Today, we end a myth. Behind locked gates, the beast stirred. Steel chains melted in its presence. It breathed in silence and exhaled fear. Even the guards assigned to open the gates refused to stand near, and when it stepped into the arena, the world seemed to stop spinning, 10 feet tall at the shoulder, armor-thick scales, a face like a serpent-lion hybrid. It didn't roar, it studied. Then, it looked at Mira. She didn't blink, she didn't speak. Instead, she knelt, not in fear, but in remembrance. She placed her palm to the ground, and everything changed. The arena's floor cracked. Ancient symbols emerged, glowing in slow, golden light. The beast took one step forward, then paused. Its head tilted sideways like it was hearing something that no one else could. Mira stood, eyes calm. She whispered, "Do you remember your name?" The crowd laughed, a human asking a beast for its name. But then, the impossible happened. The beast lowered its head. It stepped forward, and then it bowed. One knee, then both its head pressed to the stone before her feet. Gasps spread like lightning. One of the Emperor's generals stood in shock. "It's impossible. That creature has never obeyed anyone." Kale said nothing. He had begun to expect the impossible, and now he was watching it unfold. Mira walked toward the beast. It did not move. She placed her hand on its snout. It trembled. Then, from the far sides of the arena, more creatures appeared, not summoned, not released. They arrived from the crowd, from underground tunnels, from the skies. Beasts of all shapes and worlds gathered silently, surrounding Mira like a rising tide, not snarling, not fighting, just present. And then something even stranger occurred. The people stood, not to run, not to shout, but in stunned recognition. Some began to cry. Others fell to their knees, because in that moment, they remembered something they didn't know they had forgotten. A lullaby, a symbol, a dream from childhood that made no sense. Now Mira raised her hand, and every living creature, beast or being bowed high in his throne. The Emperor stood frozen, not by fear, but by truth. The empire he ruled was no longer based on dominance. Not anymore. It was standing on forgotten roots, and Mira had made the world remember. End it now. The Emperor roared. Kill her. But no soldier moved, because they couldn't. Their hands trembled. Their eyes burned with memories too old to be theirs, and too strong to deny. One soldier dropped his weapon, then another, then an entire division. Kale walked into the arena slowly. He stood before Mira, the predator still bowing at her feet. "You're not here to fight us," he said. "No," she replied. "You're here to make us see." Mira looked toward the sky, where the constellation shaped like a claw now glowed with soft silver light. "Empires rise on the shoulders of lies," she said. "But they fall the moment truth remembers how to speak." Kale dropped to one knee, not in defeat, in understanding, and across the galaxy, people began to speak the words carved on ancient ruins, now returned to memory. When the beasts bow and the silence sings, the forgotten will rise with truth as kings. A storm moved across the galaxy, but it wasn't made of fire, or ships, or blood. It was made of memory, not the kind locked in files or buried under rubble, but the kind that lives in bones, in lullabies whispered before sleep, in dreams of peace, forgotten by history, and at the center of it stood one girl, not a general, not a queen, just Mira, the human who made beasts bow and broke the silence of stars. The Emperor's throne room stood in ruins, not from bombs, but from abandonment. He was alone now. His advisors had fled. His soldiers had laid down arms. His empire, once proud and cruel, had grown silent, but not the kind of silence he used to command. This was Mira's silence, alive, awake, true. KNELT stood beside him, no longer wearing royal robes. His voice was quiet. She didn't need to kill us. She just had to show us what we forgot. The Emperor scoffed. A girl with whispers and beasts. Nothing more. KNELT turned away. No, a girl with memory. And that is stronger than any weapon. In the sky above Zeltrax, massive lights began to flicker. They weren't ships, they were mirrors. Ancient satellites built by a forgotten civilization, now reactivated. They cast holograms across the planet, memories of planets. Zeltrax had wiped clean. Races erased. Cultures buried. The truth spread like wildfire, and it reached every world under the Empire's shadow. On a broadcast channel hijacked from the Emperor's vault, Mira appeared. No grand speech, no music, no crown, just her, sitting calmly beneath a starlit sky. She looked into the lens. This is not a war. This is a reminder. You do not own what you do not remember. You do not rule what you do not respect. Her voice never rose, but it reached across light Earth. You mocked Earth, called us primitive, weak, but we held one weapon you lost, long ago stories. We passed them down when you deleted yours. We sang truth into myth, and now the myth sings back. She paused. Behind her, hundreds of beasts stood, silent as stone. Around her, survivors of lost planets, the ones who had hidden, survived, and now returned, watched with shining eyes. I am not your conqueror. I am your mirror. What you see in me was always in you, and what you choose next will decide what kind of memory you become. All across the galaxy, choices were made, weapons dropped, flags torn down, old songs remembered. The Empire didn't fall in a day, but it began to transform, not because of a girl's strength, but because she made them remember they once had their own. Weeks later, on a quiet mountain at the edge of a reborn city, Mira sat with KNELT. A breeze moved through silver trees, new life planted on old ground. He looked at her. You could have ruled them all. Why didn't you? She smiled. Because rulers are remembered, but reminders never disappear. KNELT tilted his head. So what are you now? Mira stood, looking out over a world that was learning to listen again. I'm just the first voice in a new song. She walked away, and from the trees, the wind sang back. Epilogue. Years later, child in a distant village points to the sky. Mama, is that the human girl's star? The mother smiles, brushing her daughter's hair. No, love. That's your star now. She just helped us see it again, because empires fade, but those who make others remember, they change the stars forever.